Genesis 13, an exegetical and biblical-theological commentary. Today we're diving into Genesis chapter 13, an exegetical and biblical-theological commentary. This chapter serves as a pivotal narrative in the progressive unfolding of God's divine promise plan. Section 1, Introduction to the narrative context. Following Abram's ethical failure and subsequent expulsion from Egypt, he returns to the land of Canaan. This demonstrates that the covenantal promises of land, seed, and universal blessing remain strictly tethered to God's sovereign initiative rather than human merit. Within the broader framework of a divine counsel worldview, Abram's return to the land constitutes a strategic re-entry into the territory that Yahweh intends to reclaim from the disinherited nations of Genesis 10 and 11. The chapter highlights the necessary separation of Abram from his nephew Lot to preserve the chosen line and details the formal expansion of the royal land grant. Section 2, Exegesis of Genesis 13. A. Return to the cultic center, verses 1 through 4. Expelled from Egypt, Abram retraces his steps northward through the Negev. He travels back to the hill country between Bethel and Ai, an area with greater rainfall and vegetation. This physical return parallels a spiritual recommitment. Abram returns to the very altar he had previously built and called on the name of the Lord. Utilizing insights on sanctuary space, Abram's altar serves as a localized focal point of divine presence and ritual purity. By maintaining the altar, Abram was not ashamed to publicly worship his God in a land occupied by rival deities and Canaanite inhabitants. B. The crisis of wealth and separation, verses 5 through 13. The material wealth that Abram and Lot had acquired occasioned a shortage of available grazing land. Both men possessed immense wealth, leading to inevitable quarreling between their respective herdsmen over limited natural resources. The land around Bethel and Ai was too dry for such a large number of flocks and people, necessitating a formal separation. Abram magnanimously defers the choice of land to the younger Lot, forestalling family strife and acting as a peacemaker. Lot lifted up his eyes and chose the fertile Jordan Valley, setting out toward the east. Lot's decision to travel eastward carries ominous canonical overtones, echoing the eastward expulsions of Adam and Eve following their sin, as well as Cain following his judgment. Lot lived a transitional existence in the cities of the plain, eventually pitching his tent near Sodom. While Lot chose to dwell among a population described as wicked, great sinners against the Lord, Abram faithfully remained in Canaan. See the reaffirmation of the promise, verses 14 through 18. Once Lot departs, Yahweh explicitly directs Abram to lift up his eyes and survey the land. Unlike ancient Near Eastern suzerain vassal treaties that imposed obligations upon a vassal, this covenant functions as a royal land grant. In this framework, the suzerain, Yahweh, obligates himself to the faithful vassal, Abram. God promises the visible land to Abram and his offspring forever, utilizing the simile of the dust of the earth to describe the innumerable multitude of his future descendants. Abram is instructed to walk the length and breadth of the land, an act of visionary possession that solidifies his faith. He then moves to Hebron and builds another altar, continuously establishing Yahweh's cultic footprint in the land. Section 3, New Testament Appropriations of Genesis 13. The New Testament writers organically connect the promises of Genesis 13 to their Christological and eschatological fulfillments without abrogating their original concrete significance. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 16, the Apostle Paul explicitly draws upon the seed or offspring language of the Abrahamic covenant. He identifies Christ as the ultimate singular fulfillment of the promise given to Abram. In Acts chapter 7, verse 5, in his defense before the Sanhedrin, Stephen alludes to the land promise of Genesis 13:15. He notes that God promised to give the land as a possession to Abraham and his descendants after him, even when he had no child. In Romans chapter 4, verse 13, Paul expands the localized land grant of Genesis 13 into a global inheritance. He states that the promise to Abraham and his offspring was that he would be heir of the world, demonstrating how the new covenant extrapolates the localized land promise to encompass the entire earth. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 through 8, the Apostle Peter reflects on Lot's residence in Sodom. Despite his poor geographical choice, the Lord eventually delivered righteous Lot from Sodom. Section 4, Theological Synthesis. Read through the lens of Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan theology. Genesis 13 resists both the artificial discontinuities of classical dispensationalism and the over-spiritualization of covenant theology. The land of Canaan is a concrete, everlasting gift to ethnic Israel, serving as the beachhead for Yahweh's cosmic reclamation project following the Babel disinheritance. Abram's seed, ultimately culminating in the Messiah, is the means by which this localized blessing is universalized to the nations. The text preserves the organic unity of Scripture. The physical land matters, the physical seed matters, and the altar points forward to the ultimate sanctuary cleansing work of Christ, whose blood clears the impurity separating humanity from God, thereby restoring divine presence. That's our look at Genesis 13. As always, the promises hold firm because they rest on God's faithfulness, not ours. Thanks for joining me today. If this encouraged you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in the next one.